Welcome to Reflections for this afternoon. It is more comfortable in here than it is outside for a change, so we're glad to have you. I am really excited about our speaker this afternoon. I hope you are. And I will admit, and I suspect some of you are similar, that I have some cultural bias about the Middle East. And the problem is, I don't know anything about the Middle East, nor its culture, nor its people. And I think that tends to develop bias. I hope to dispel some of that this afternoon as we hear from our speaker. Frances Fuller, thank you for sharing with us this afternoon. And a brief introduction, as Frances was born and grew up in Wynne, Arkansas. Now, we're not going to talk about Arkansas basketball today, but for those of you who are not familiar with the geography of the state of Arkansas, Wynne is now in the middle of farming country. It grew up as a railroad intersection town, and just to jog your memories, it's mighty close to Colt and Hickory Ridge and Cherry Hill, so that'll bring you close to home for Frances. Frances had a degree in journalism from Louisiana Tech, a master's in religious education from Golden Gate Seminary. I assume that's San Francisco, okay, and a master's in English from locally Hollins University. She and her husband, Wayne, spent 30 years in Jordan and Lebanon, and with the Baptist Foreign Mission Board. And Wayne worked with schools over there. Frances ended up working in her own publishing business, where for the most part she took, notably, let me say that, they took and translated into Arabic many of the Christian literature items there. The first time that had ever been done in that part of the world. The 3 sons, 2 daughters. Wayne passed away a few years ago, 17. Frances is also an author. She has, written 2 books, both notable and in our library. One is called In Borrowed Houses, and it's a memoir of living in Lebanon for some 7 years. And then the other, which I love, is Helping Yourself Grow Old, where Frances, as the subtitle says, it's things she said to herself as she got close to 90. So I'm excited about our speaker this afternoon. And one thing, I did sneak a picture of Frances in Wynne, Arkansas, in her early years on a bicycle. Frances, y'all put your hands together. Let's welcome Frances here.
Well, he got that mostly right. Actually, this picture was taken in Berkeley. I met Wayne in Berkeley. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. I'm really happy the time has come because I'm really happy to get it past me, you know. And I apologize that I'm probably going to sit down in a little while. I have some neuropathy and I can't stand still for very long. I can walk, but I can't stand still. My feet start to get numb, and I don't want to lose track of my feet. So Actually, I would like to explain before I go on something that I just want you to know. Can you hear? Can you hear? Okay, am I speaking right in the right place? Okay. Buster has made it possible for me to sit down and to have a handheld mic, but I thought I would start here. I would like to explain. It's not really necessary, but I think I want to tell you that I am not a Southern Baptist now. I have joined the Episcopal Church in Roanoke, and I have a daughter who is an Episcopal priest. And I just want to say that somehow, through the years, Southern Baptists went one way, and I went another way. And but I want to be sure that you know that I feel they were the absolutely best mission board in the world. They were the best sending agency. They so supported us. In every way, they supported us. And they made us a promise when we signed on with them that if we would spend our entire 30 years with them, that they would pay our medical bills for the rest of our lives. Well, the way it turned out was my husband had a devastating heart attack when he was only 62 while we were still overseas. And even though we stayed on until he was 65, till we were both 65, they kept that promise to us. I could not even be here at Brandon Oaks if we had had to pay the medical bills that we had, because Wayne lived another 22 years and was in and out of the hospital and had surgeries and was in the ICU, and the medical bills were enormous. And so I just want to tell you about that integrity, because they did everything for us and kept their word in every way. When Buster asked me the other day for a catchy title for my presentation, he happened to ask me that shortly after someone had said to me, "Wasn't there a lot of war in the Middle East when you were there?" And I thought, yes, there was a lot of war in the Middle East. And that caused me to remember something that our youngest daughter, said. This happened just at the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. This was like 1975. Cynthia was 14 years old. Jan was already at Hollins. Our son Tim was away in university. So we just had 3 children at home. And we had put our beds in the floor. When the shooting, well, it started, when some of the boys from a Christian militia shot up a Palestinian bus and killed a bunch of Palestinian young men who were recruits for their militia. And the shooting just didn't stop. It just kept going. And when they brought out the artillery, that's when we put our beds in the floor. We lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building, but artillery in the city is a fearsome thing. So, but in the morning, Cynthia is trying to put the house in order again. I'm on the telephone trying to find out how somebody else fared in the night, apparently. And she can't get her brothers to cooperate with her in neatening up the house. And so she's fussing at them, and one of them says, "What's the point? In a few hours, we have to put it all down again." And Cynthia said, "War is no excuse for this house to be a wreck." And so that's how war is no excuse got to be a motto in our house when people didn't do what they ought to be doing. I do want you to know, people sometimes said to me when we were living in the Middle East, they would say, why do those Arabs like to fight so much? They don't like to fight. That's not why we have war in the Middle East. If you don't know why we have war in the Middle East, I suggest that you go to eBay and buy yourself an old, beat-up, used copy of the Reader's Digest from April 1948. There's an article in there called, "Must There Be War in the Middle East?" It is written by Bayard Dodge, who was the president of the American University in Beirut. He says in that article, if a Jewish state is established in the middle of the Arab world, there will be war for 100 years. It has only been 75. We have a little piece to go yet. His prediction came true. As for the effect of war on that occasion when Cynthia was trying to neaten the house, we came to see that she was absolutely right. And when I wrote my 20 rules for surviving Civil War, number 12 was confine chaos to the street, clean up your house. The reason I wrote that is that we had learned by experience that we start to fall apart if there is no order at all, if everything is chaos. You have to have some order for yourself. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Here, maybe I should sit down and use the other mic. Maybe I should try that. Sorry, is this better? Oh, great. Okay. Well, my feet like it better too, so I'll do it. Have to get back to where I was. Yeah, yes, thank you. Confine chaos to the street. And so that's why really this became a kind of a motto for us. And it turns out that, the war continued and there was really chaos and it was difficult for people to go to work. So it felt a little bit like a vacation sometimes because, well, we don't have to go to work today. It's too dangerous to go to work. So we had an excuse not to go to work. But you know, there were a lot of people in Beirut who lived just a day at a time. They went out in the morning and they made enough money to buy tonight's dinner and tomorrow's breakfast. And they went home. One morning I went down to the grocery store just around the corner to get some eggs. And I always bought my eggs in this big tray that was 30 eggs on the tray. And as I'm walking out with this tray of eggs, I thought I heard a voice say, "Give me an egg." And I looked around, who said this to me? And there was a handsome little boy right at my elbow. And I said, "What did you say?" He said, "Give me an egg." This little boy obviously was not a beggar. He was very well dressed. He was clean. And so I said, "What are you going to do with it?" I thought maybe he's going to throw it at somebody. He said, "I'm going to eat it for my breakfast." So I leaned down. He took an egg off the tray. And you know how sometimes you pass a child a cookie tray, and he gets one in one hand, and then you just have this feeling he wants one in the other hand. And I said, "Is one enough?" He said, "It's enough for me. Can I have one for my sister?" And so I said, sure. So he took another egg and he started running. And I thought, oh my goodness, if he falls, he's going to break them both. But then I realized that this is a child whose father hasn't worked for a couple of days, and they don't have any breakfast. And he's hungry. He was not a beggar. Obviously, he was not a beggar. So I'm just making the point that people had to work. And at the beginning, companies would at the beginning of the war, companies were, they were sympathetic with their employees who couldn't get to work. And so they paid people whether they came to work or not. I paid my employees at the publishing house, which, by the way, belonged to the mission, not to me. I was elected to run the publishing house. But I just felt sympathetic with my employees that they had to get out and risk their lives in order to get to work. So we would often pay people, though they couldn't come to work. And eventually we learned to just make exceptions for certain people and to make requirements. For instance, I made my editors take work home with them when they left the office. Work that they could do at home if they were unable to come to work the next day. And there was one of my employees, actually, when the war broke out, when the Civil War broke out, I only had like 6 employees, and 3 of them got injured in the first few months. One of them, Abu Isam, was my stock clerk. He was a very simple man, very faithful and sweet, wonderful to work with. Abu Isam had been walking on the street one day when shells began to fall. And he and a woman who actually happened to be walking beside him stopped and pounded on the door at some building, trying to get somebody to open a door and let them come inside to shelter. And no one came, and a shell fell behind them, and a big chunk of shrapnel hit the woman in the back of her head, and she fell dead. Abu Isam had a jillion little pieces of shrapnel in his back. And Abu Isam was so jumpy, he was so shattered by that I have seen him nearly fall apart because the wind blew a door shut. And so I made special arrangements for Abu Isam, and I let him come and live in our storeroom. We made a little cubbyhole for him between the books that he was responsible for. Though that's just a small example of the kind of thing that we did so that we could keep going. But one of my employees could not do his job anymore because of the job that he did required the post office, and there was no post office. And there was a period of time when his part of town was the battlefront, and it was impossible for him to come to work. And during that period of time, he said he'd listen to the radio and walk the floor, and listen to the radio and walk the floor. And he said, one day I said to myself, what are some of those things that I was going to do if I ever had time? And he sat down and started composing that concordance that Buster was trying to tell us about. A concordance is an absolutely necessary tool for any really serious Bible study. You can be sure that your pastor or your rector, your priest, whoever, you can be sure he has a concordance. But in the Middle East, the Arab people did not have a concordance. The Bible had been in the Arabic language for 1,000 years, and there was no concordance. People were not able to study it. And so when I saw Ghassan next, he had a stack of pages of it that he had finished. There was a long way to go. There was a lot of work yet to do before that would be done. But I realized how very precious and important this was, and paid him to finish that. I had to do a lot of work too, and it was such a difficult. The creation of it, the putting of it on paper was so difficult. I bought an Arabic type composer, an IBM type composer, so that we could typeset the words. It was like a computer, but not as good as the computers we have now. It would hold 7 pages only of our concordance, and then we had to correct those, and then because then they were lost, they were not anymore in the computer. I don't want to describe to you all the difficulties that we had, but we had to put it on a light table. We had to make up the pages by putting them on a light table. And the type composer had to leave a space for the Greek words. And where are we going to get the Greek words? We can't type the Greek words. We cut them out of dictionaries. We destroyed 3 Greek dictionaries to take the words and put them in our concordance. So this is just an example of the way that we found to do things that we didn't really have the technology to do. I had 2 big things that I wanted to accomplish with the publishing house. One was materials for children, and the other was tools for the churches, because the churches didn't have what they needed to work with to do their jobs. I want to tell you a little experience that I had that is just, I just so want to tell you how I identified with Arab children. You know, my home was a very poor home. There were no books in my house when I was a child. My mother was really semi-literate. She never read to me. No one ever read to me a bedtime story. I had children myself when I got the concept of a bedtime story. My mother always claimed that the first word I ever said was catalog. And I don't know if it's because I was so enamored of the Sears and Roebuck catalog, but it's hard to believe. But after I learned to read when I went to school, I so wanted books. And I didn't have anything at home. I didn't have things to read. One day I was driving. Actually, there were things I did because I couldn't send the young men to do it because life became dangerous. It's odd, you know, but in a country, in an environment in which women are kind of like second class, it's really a man's world. A woman can get away with things too. Because of that, she's not suspicious. You know, I could get in my car and go anywhere. And they didn't think, what's she up to? No, they thought, poor dumb blonde over here. What does she think she's doing, you know? So I was going all the way to Jordan, and you have to stop at the Lebanese border and show your documents, and then, half a kilometer down the road, then you have to stop at the Syrian border and surrender your documents. And then that has to be done again going out of Syria into Jordan. So and then there were little boys who worked at the border who loved to come to your car and get your documents and take them in for you. And it was really nice, especially if you were a woman, because it wasn't fun to go in there in that little room with all those men. So I loved to give my documents to a little boy who would grab them and run in and bring them back all signed, and then I could go on to the next thing. And I just needed to give him a few piastres. Well, it happened that I was going to a Sunday school conference in Jordan, And so I had with me some little leaflets that were they were like a folded sheet of paper with a picture on one side, and you open it, and there's a story inside, a Bible story with a beautiful colored picture on the front. And so I thought when I was giving the little boy his money that I would give him one of these leaflets. So I did, and he just took it and ran away. And in just a moment, another boy came to my car and said, "Could I have a story?" And so I gave him one of the leaflets. And before I knew what happened, my car was surrounded by little boys. Everybody saying, "Could I have a story? I want a story. Please, could I have a story?" And I gave away all of my leaflets that were supposed to be my exhibit at the Sunday school conference I was going to, because I couldn't resist those children and their eagerness to have a story. And when I pulled out from there, when I left, I had to look back over my shoulder to see if there's another car coming or anything. And there was this retaining wall and there was a row of little boys, like birds on a telephone wire or on a fence. They were all sitting side by side on that wall, reading their stories. I wouldn't take anything for that picture. But I so loved the children and wanted to give them good literature. There was so little for them. And I went to Chicago when I was at home one time. And at the David C. Cook Company, I saw the Picture Bible. Did any of you have the Picture Bible? Do you know what the Picture Bible was? Somebody's nodding. The Picture Bible was, actually there were 6 books, but then they combined them sometimes into one book. But the design of it was like a comic book. It wasn't funny pictures. It was nice pictures, beautiful colors, and all the Bible stories illustrated. There were 4 volumes of the Old Testament and 2 of the New Testament. It was so beautiful. In the Arab world, there never had been anything like that. And I thought, I have to have it. Now, I had a policy that I had committees that helped me choose things for publication, because as the director, I didn't want that much power, that I have all the decision-making power to decide what we're going to publish. But for that, I didn't wait for a committee. I signed the contract that day, and I published that Picture Bible. I have to tell you that was like in the early 80s that I did that. And they are still reprinting it, and it has sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Everybody will buy that for their children. Muslims will buy it. And many of those stories are in the Old Testament stories are in the Quran, and so they love that. And there were times when it carried the publishing house financially, because it was such a success. And I just feel so good about being able to publish that and to make the price affordable, so that Arab children could have that. And then, of course, the concordance is a wonderful tool that we made for the churches. Another thing we did was a hymn book. We did a comprehensive hymnal. And that's the hardest thing we ever did. That was, we were working like beyond the technology that we had to work with. Actually, at the time that we did that, in America, there was a piano that you could sit down and play, and then it would write the notes for what you were playing. We didn't have access to that. I wanted to use the Arab songs that were being written all over the Arab world. The Arabs are very creative people. The Egyptians are so creative. And people were just making up songs. They couldn't notate them. They couldn't write it down. but they could imagine it and sing it and play it. So I worked with recordings off of tape recorders and hired musicians to notate them. And we created a hymnal that had about 100 probably of the old songs of the church that are sung everywhere. And the rest of it was music from the Arab world. And in our little community, we only had about 3,000 people. But I sold my books to everybody. And I don't know how I came up with this number, but I printed 17,000 of those hymn books. And I sold all of them in a year. Actually, the last 1,000 went to Iraq. The manager of a bookstore in Amman called me on the phone, and he said, there's a priest here from Iraq, and he has seen your hymnal, and he wants them really bad. The problem is, it was at that time when there was an embargo, and they couldn't send any money out of Iraq. And so the man said, I want them so bad, but I can't send you any money. So I made a phone call and got somebody to pay for him. And so I sent the last 1,000 of those books to Iraq. And I have in my file a letter that I received from the pastor of a church thanking me for his share of those hymnals, and I feel so good about that. The thing that the churches really, really wanted from me, though, was so hard to give them. They wanted Sunday school material. And they imagine all these churches they didn't have any literature that was to teach their children that was local. It was all translated. And it was never right. Culturally, it was never right. And so but how could I give them Arabic Sunday school literature? How could I do that? I couldn't do that. And so I was telling them that I couldn't do that. And they were so sad and depressed. And finally I said to them, what has to happen is that we have to become a community of people who can do this. I explained to them how it was that Southern Baptists did that. They have Bible scholars. They have curriculum scholars. They have good teachers who know how to, they have good writers. Who do we have? Do we have any of these things? Finally, we made a decision that together we would try, and we would do this. And so we started, actually the David C. Cook Company gave me 2 consultants to come to help to lead our very first writer training workshop to write curriculum. And when they were, it was almost time for the workshop, and shells were falling, the guns were banging, and I was expecting people to come to fly into the airport, and I couldn't imagine how this is going to happen. So I actually moved the venue. I moved to another place where it was a little bit quieter. You could hear the guns, but they were a little bit farther off. And the very day that I did that, I got a cable from the 2 guys in Chicago. They said, "We're scared. Are you going to do this?" I sent them a cable back, and I said, "We're going to do it." So they arrived. They were scared, but the people came, and we did this workshop. Everybody wrote at least 1 lesson. One girl wrote 3 lessons in the few days that we were there. I had to permit them to use their radios so that they could keep in touch and know that their families were safe, because we were hearing the shells falling all of the time that we were in this workshop. That's just to give you some idea of how determined we were to do this work. And in the end, we actually finished. We did Sunday school material starting with 4-year-olds, and we went all the way through 16-year-olds. We couldn't do enough. We weren't a big enough community to make it throwaway material. We had to, it's material that has to be repeated. But we actually got it done. It was extremely, extremely difficult, but we got it done. Then something really, really bad was happening in Lebanon. That's something that you know about. You no doubt heard about it. Somebody was kidnapping Americans. I'm going to have to use my, sorry. Lost track of it, and it was in my lap. Okay, here you see where Lebanon is. I don't have a pointer. Oh, yes, I do. I have a pointer. There's Lebanon right there. So you see how small it is, just right there, and Israel just below, and then Syria wrapping around it, and then Jordan over there. And I was using writers from the whole Middle East for that curriculum, and I had to travel a lot myself in order to do that. But I wanted to tell you that Americans were being kidnapped, and the American government could not get them released. Now, this is the city of Beirut. And what I want to show you is that, well, this is the most close-up picture. Sorry, I'm not doing this very well. See Musaibi? That's the area that my publishing house, that the publishing office was in at first. And when the war started, I moved it because it was just, we were on a dividing line, so it was inevitable that we were going to get shells from any direction. Whoever was shelling, we would get some of it. And so I moved the publishing house up. Well, I have to go back to the other. I moved it up here, right about here, and I will show you while we're here. You see, this is the port area. The American embassy was right about here. And the American Community School and the American University of Beirut were right in here. So the embassy, which was destroyed later, was right here. And actually, Wayne and I moved at the time when the war started and it was so bad in Beirut. We moved out of that apartment that I was telling you about, and we lived right here in a town called Beit Mary. And so when Americans were being kidnapped, they were in this area right over here. This is the point of Beirut, is where they were being kidnapped. There was no one who was kidnapped out here in this area. But the kidnapping began with State Department people, and then went to university professors and journalists, and so many people were kidnapped, and many were mistreated, some died, and the point is that our government could never, didn't know who was doing it and couldn't get them back, and our government was embarrassed. And over, they politely asked Americans to get out of Lebanon. And they would say, everybody except necessary personnel should leave. And we would look at one another and say, I'm necessary. Are you necessary? And we would not go. We felt that we had a higher order. We felt that we were doing what was right. We were doing very, very important work. And we didn't, I do find that it's difficult to explain. Some of it is difficult to explain. Wayne and I lived in Lebanon. We had lived in Lebanon 17 years. How long can you live in a place and it's not home? Lebanon was home. The people around us were all of our friends and our supporters, and we helped them and they helped us, and it even felt like to leave would be like, okay, this was great while your country was all good, but when you got in trouble, we are out of here. What kind of a testimony is that, We just didn't think it was right for us to leave, and so we didn't leave. And so they kept telling us, and finally, the government decided, actually, they had a situation like this in Libya. They had asked Americans to leave Libya, and they didn't. And they just never did. And so they thought, we can't let these people in Lebanon do us the same way. And they decided that for an American to stay in Lebanon was a criminal offense. And the penalty was automatic, 3 years in prison when we did eventually come back to America. It was very, very hard. They gave us 1 month to get out of Lebanon. In that 1 month, we had letters from our children, who are all in the States. We had letters from all 5 of them, each from his different place. I remember Tim said, I can't imagine what you will do, but I know it'll be right. And Dwight said, if you want to stay and go to prison when you come home, I will be proud of you just like I've always been. I accomplished some of the things I wanted to accomplish in the Middle East. But my biggest accomplishment is that I raised 5 really fine people. But we finally had to get on the boat and go. But I found a way. A lawyer told me, the State Department cannot tell you where you can go. They can only tell you where you can use their documents. So if you can go to Lebanon without using your passport, it's okay. And I found that with my Lebanese residence permit, I could get on a boat in the evening. The airport was closed. It wasn't safe to fly. But I could get on a ferry and arrive in the port up here. I could arrive up there in the morning. And my director, the Foreign Mission Board's director in our area, gave me permission to go. I spent a quarter of my time in Lebanon. And anyway, I had learned through the years that I could do whatever in Lebanon. You see, all the people who were kidnapped were men. No woman was kidnapped. And I also want to show you one more thing. This is very important. Do you see this? This shaded line right here? This is Beirut, West Beirut, East Beirut. Everybody who was kidnapped over here. Nobody was ever kidnapped over here. And so we wrote a letter, even when we were fighting this order to leave. We wrote a letter to the Middle East desk in Washington. And they answered our letter very politely and said that they couldn't treat Lebanon like two countries. Lebanon was one country. And so to order people out of this part of Lebanon, they had to order them out of Lebanon, period. And so that was how we left Lebanon. I haven't followed my notes very well. I've not done a good job like that. I hope I have given you the high points, and I'm happy to answer questions now if you have questions.
Geographically, how large is that area of Beirut? What size city?
Actually, I could drive from, let's see, this is Sinofil. I could drive from there down to Musaibi in between 20 minutes and half an hour, depending on how much traffic there was. It's a small city. The first year of the war was all here in Beirut, but the city has was supposed to be a million people. And the first year of the war, 100,000 people died in Beirut. That's like a tenth of the population. That was 1975-76. Yes.
So how much longer did you stay in Lebanon?
I didn't make it very clear. When we left, we went only as far as Cyprus. And it was in Cyprus where I could get on the ferry and go and be in Beirut the next morning.
Did you go back there and continue working?
Yes, my staff was working, and I went, to be with them and to help them. And I actually spent a quarter of my time in Lebanon during that, until we retired, which was 1994. Right at the end of 1994, we came home. We went to Beirut originally in 1964, so that was 30 years. What else was I going to tell you about that? I was the only missionary who did that. We all had to leave, and different people went different places and found things to do. I was the only one who went back and forth and spent that time in Lebanon. My husband went once, but, it's because I was a woman, I was a blonde, I was a foreigner, I stood out, and I don't know, I could, a woman can ask questions, a woman can say, I really did a dumb thing and I need help, and the Arab men would help me, and I just was always safe. I always felt safe. And I would get in my car and drive all the way to Jordan by myself through Syrian checkpoints. There would be like 15 Syrian checkpoints between me and the border, and they would say, "What do you have in the books, in the boxes?" And I'd say, "Books." "What kind of books?" "Spiritual books." Muslim books, they'd say? "No, Christian books." "Go ahead, go ahead." They would have made my husband open every box. Once I went the wrong way. I tried to take a shortcut, and I came to a roadblock, to a fork in the road, and my sense of direction said, "Go this way," and I did. And I wound up in a Syrian military zone. It was when Syria was occupying Lebanon. I wound up in a Syrian military zone. And so I said to the soldier who stopped me, I said, "Isn't this the road to Sulphur?" He said, "Oh, you missed it back there at the fork in the road." And I said, "Well, oh, I can go back." He said, "No, never mind. It's okay. Go ahead." And he sent me the rest of the way through them. I think my husband would have been in jail in Damascus. He stayed in Cyprus while I did. Although he also went on I remember the Iraq War had happened, and Hussein's troops had filled up they had gone through Kurdish villages, and they filled up all their wells with stones so that the people couldn't come back to their villages. And Wayne went with a group of men who went to Kurdistan and dug new water wells for them. And so he was gone, I don't know, at least a month, maybe two, when he did that. You want this?
No more blonde jokes. Thank you, Francis. We are indeed blessed to have you in our community.